Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, The Thing in the Fields. When I was young, I lived on a farm in rural Oregon with my parents. I was an only child. We weren't a big commercial farm, just a family type thing. We had 5 cows, 3 horses, a small herd of goats, 2 dogs, and 1 chicken coop. We also had some Indian runner ducks. We kept mostly as pets. We didn't really make any money off the place, just enough to sustain the animals, and a little extra for ourselves. Money enough to take a decent vacation every couple of years. Dad had his other job in town, an insurance agent. He was the only one around, really. The town wasn't more than about 1,500 people. Mom gave horse riding lessons as well. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. It was really an easy life, or at least it could have been a lot worse. I went to school. Dad went to work. Mom took care of the animals. Then we all had dinner together every night, and I would go to bed while Mom and Dad had a beer or 2 and watch the news. Sometimes at night, I would hear things outside, mostly just normal stuff. The cows or horses would get spooked by a coyote or something, or I would hear the dogs chasing a rabbit, barking their heads off. Every once in a great while we would find a chicken dead. Dad would always tell me about it, but never let me see the body. Although I asked frequently, he would keep Mom and I inside until he had gone out. Did whatever he did with the body, throw sawdust over any blood, and then life would go on as normal. I assumed it was foxes, as I had seen a couple of them out in the pasture over the years, slinking around back and forth through the grass. The summer when I was 10 years old, I remember helping Mom change the bedding in the horse stalls, when we heard a huge racket going on outside. If you've never heard the sounds of a horse in pain, you don't want to. Trust me, it sounds almost like a person screaming. Well, that's what we heard, and one of our horses, the Palomino, came running into the barn with a wound on his left thigh. Furlong marks, like claw marks, ran across its body for about a foot. It had blood running down its leg, and was limping. I was so scared by the sight of that much blood that Mom locked the horse in a stall and made me go inside with one of the dogs. She told me to lock the door and stay inside until she came in to get me. I did. Eventually Mom came inside and told me that the horse had hurt itself on the barbed wire that ran the perimeter of the pasture. We owned more land beyond that, but it was mostly forested. I guess I believed her at the time, but at dinner that night, I noticed Dad was being particularly quiet and Mom was talking a lot more than she normally did. She was being really animated, and I noticed that Dad had gotten his rifle out and set it by the back door. Usually he only did that when the coyotes had been acting up. That night I went to bed as normal, but I had trouble falling asleep. I turned on my desk lamp and decided to read comic books until I got tired. I have a very vivid memory of reading Uncanny X-Men and hearing the back door open. Looking out, I could see my dad by the porch light, lighting a cigarette and holding his rifle under his arm. He started walking over to the driveway and then turned to follow the fence line. I couldn't sleep until I knew Dad was back safe. I kept coming downstairs with the excuse of getting water to see if Dad was back in the house yet, and each time all I saw was Mom sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at a blank TV screen and looking worried, sighing occasionally. Eventually, about 4 in the morning, I think, Dad did come back, and I was so tired and relieved that I fell asleep as soon as I knew he was home. He never told me what he did that night, but I never thought to ask. 2 months later I was back in school. It rains lot in Oregon in the fall, and this day was no different. All I could hear from my bedroom was rain hitting the ground and the aluminum roof of the chicken coop. There was light thunder in the distance, but it was slowly getting closer. I thought I had heard a coyote yapping out around the garage, or it could have been one of the dogs. I looked out, straining my eyes to see whatever there may have been. In a brief and distant lightning flash I saw something. It looked almost like a person, but hunched over, and with a long torso. It was tall, taller than Dad, who was a good 6'4", at least. I just barely caught a glimpse of it, on the near side of the garage. Then the light faded and I didn't see it again that night. There was another dead chick, and the next morning, the third in just as many weeks. I told Dad what I had seen the previous night. The color went out of his cheeks momentarily, until he told me that the storm must have been playing tricks on me. I accepted that. For months after that we lost a cow. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up at the same time. There was a lot of noise in the pasture, but only briefly. The cry of a dying animal, and a primitive, guttural yell that I had never heard before. Dad rushed up to my room. I could hear him running up the stairs to my room. He had his rifle in hand, and opened my door. He saw I was awake and told me to stay inside no matter what and tried to go back to sleep. I don't think I have to say that sleep wasn't really an option any longer, but I did stay in my room, with a blanket held tight around my shoulders and staring out the window. Probably about 10 minutes later, I heard gunshots in the field. I don't know what he was shooting at, whether it was whatever had attacked the cow, or the cow itself, trying to put the animal out of its misery. Dad rarely, if ever, talked about that night. I later found out that he had gotten to the cow only to find it ripped open on the ground, bleeding out from its torso. The shots I heard were him shooting the cow in the head. It kept going like that for years. A chicken or a duck here and there, something bigger only very rarely. It sounds absurd, but I almost came to think of it as commonplace. I only ever caught glimpses of the thing until what comes next. It terrified me. It happened in the middle of the day, over the course of a long weekend when my parents had gone to Seattle to see my uncle, who was ill. It was on a Saturday afternoon. I was 17 years old. I was out in the barn putting out food for the horses and the dogs. The horses were running around out in the pasture, and the dogs were asleep in the corner of one of the horse stalls. I heard something rustling in the tall grass outside in the pasture. The dogs looked around a little bit, but didn't seem to mind. I assumed it was just one of the horses waiting for me to leave so they could eat. I kept going about what I was doing, and in several minutes I thought I heard breathing. I turned to look and it was standing in the door tall as hell, even hunched over. The sun was streaming in behind it, lighting up all the dust in the air around it like some kind of sickly halo. It was looking at me, considering me maybe. It was trying to decide whether or not I was food. I remember swearing, turning, and running as fast as I could for the house, not even thinking panic, causing my legs to move. It was behind me, not even breathing hard. I heard his feet hitting the ground in a constant rhythm. I got to the house, opened the door, slammed it behind me, and locked it as fast as I could. I tore through the house, locking every door, and drawing the blinds on every window. I could hear it snarling outside. The back door, the dogs were barking at it, but they wouldn't try to attack the thing It was too big and they knew it. It roared at the dogs and they ran off, probably to hide in the pasture. I went to my parents' bedroom and got Dad's rifle. I loaded it, set up a chair in the living room facing the back door, and waited as it started prowling around the house. I could hear its feet crunching on the gravel of the driveway and the wooden planks of the back deck. It kept walking back and forth. I thought about trying to look through a window to see it, but I was too scared eventually. After hours of hoping it would go away, the sun went down. I turned on all of the outside lights and went up to my room. I opened my window with the rifle in my hands, hoping to be able to pick the thing off from above. I saw it lurking just beyond the glow from the porch light. It had long, sinewy arms and walked on bent knee. It was by the chicken coop. Then it disappeared from view. I heard the chicken squawking and screeching. The thing reappeared with a dead, bloody chicken in its hands. It bit off one of the wings with jaws that were dripping with slime and drool and let the dead bird drop to the ground at its feet. Then it looked at me. Its eyes made contact with my eyes. It turned away again. Back to the chickens it came back with another bird, mutilated it in front of me, and dropped it. It went back again and again. I should have taken a shot at it, but I was astounded, trying to figure out what it was doing. Then it hit me. It was a show of power. It was showing me that it was stronger than me, that it could do whatever it wanted to do, because I couldn't stop it. At the same time, I felt powerless and sick and powerless, because what it was saying was true. If it was just that thing and me, I wouldn't stand a chance. Sickened because I realized what kind of intelligence it would need to be able to convey that message. The thought shook me out of my stupor, and I remembered the rifle at my side. It was heading back to the chickens, and I decided that when it came back, I would take my shot. It strode back to the porch almost arrogant, walking on bended knee with those arms so long that the chicken was nearly dragging on the ground. I raised the rifle up to my eye and tried to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard I could see the rifle shaking ever so slightly in rhythm with each heartbeat. I could hear pounding in my own ears. It raised the body to its mouth, and just as it was about to put the chicken's head inside, I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun echoed in the now shattered quiet of the nighttime standoff, and I heard it howl. A painful, loud, startled howl. I had hit it on the outside of the shoulder. It ran off into the night. I never saw it again. It was still out there, though it still killed chickens and other things more often than before. I'm writing all of this now because my parents died 3 weeks ago. They worked in a collision with a drunk driver. He survived. They left me the farm, and I intend to live here with my own family. I'm 32 now, and I work for an Oregon Fish and Game office in Salem. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Stephanie. We have one son, Zachary, who is 3 years old. We are expecting a daughter, and for months I've come to the farmhouse alone today. I told Steph that I just wanted some time alone in my parents' house to deal with some emotions. She was very understanding. I've come back to claim what is rightfully mine. I have Dad's rifle next to me on the table, and it is almost dusk. I've also brought several portable halogen lights to set up around the house, and my own shotgun. I'm borrowing a handgun from Joe, a guy at Fish and Game, who I work with. When I am done typing this account of my memories, I will print it out and leave it on the dining room table, along with my wedding ring and my key to the safe deposit box where my will is kept. Everything is loaded and ready, hopefully. I will return here to collect these things, and nobody will ever know I wrote this. Steph, in the event that you are the unfortunate soul to find this, which I am terrified to think seems a likely outcome. The thought of you having to go on alone hurts me more than anything in this world ever can. Know that I love you more than anything, and I hope you understand that I am doing this to keep you safe. Zachary, I love you and can only hope you grow up to be a good, kind-hearted, and strong man like your grandfather was. To my unborn daughter, if I don't live long enough to meet you, it will be the single greatest regret of my life. Tell the police, tell Fish and Game, call Joe. He is one of the few people who knows about this. Make this situation known. Eventually someone will kill it. Even if it isn't me, goodbye for now. The second story. The safe. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, or randomly checked your watch in the daytime, to see the same time over and over again? For me, it's 11:17. I would say 1 out of every 3 times I check my watch it's 11:17. You may have another one, like 333 or 12:50. If you don't have one, count your blessings and stop reading. If you do have a time that you can't seem to shake, follow these instructions. Find the place where you were born. The more specific, the better. The exact room if you can. But sometimes what you're looking for can wander around a bit. Search the room and the surrounding area thoroughly. You should eventually find a safe with a 4-digit keypad combination. You know which 4 digits to enter. Use a 0 first if your hour is below 10. Inside you should find a manila envelope. Take it out. And be careful to note, it's surprisingly heavyweight, because you don't want to accidentally drop it with the envelope in hand. Get out of there, and make sure nobody saw you. Once you're in a safe place, open the package up. You should find an external hard drive, and 2 envelopes. One is labeled photos. Open that up. You will find a series of Polaroids documenting your life story. Each one will have a date and a brief description printed in the white space. You will have never seen these pictures before, or have any recollection of someone taking them. The picture as though a stalker took them. Be very careful when looking through these photos that you don't look at any photos beyond today's date, because they are there, and the future is not meant to be known. The other envelope is labeled certificates, and is nowhere near as thick as the photos envelope. I would advise against looking through this altogether, as it will contain all legal documents from your entire life. From your birth certificate, to your marriage license, to every driver's license, business license, traffic ticket, and a birth certificate that has your name listed under mother or father. Of utmost warning, it also contains your death certificate. Obtain a cheap computer that you won't feel too badly about parting with, and a high-quality printer that is full on toner and paper, with extras as needed to replace. Make sure the printer drivers are installed properly. Do not plug the hard drive until you are completely ready to print out all the information you'll find on it. And most importantly, DONOTCONNECTT GCOMPU TDRTOTA RTA or NT or NET. If the computer has wireless capability, remove them. It needs to be physically impossible for the machine to connect to the internet on its own. Once you've plugged the hard drive in, don't do anything on the computer. The hard drive has software that will take control from here on out. If you followed the instructions precisely, the printer should be spewing out pages like mad. They will be blueprints, schematics, and mathematical formulae that most people won't have the capacity to understand. If the printer runs out of paper before it's finished, be sure to load more in you. I'll know when it's finished because the computer will shut down and never turn on again, and the final printed page will say ENDO, FINST, or UCTIONSET. It will then provide an IP address. Go to that IP address in your web browser. It will prompt you for your 4-digit password from there. Further instructions will be given. About a dozen of us have followed these instructions so far, and comparing our printouts shows that each hard doctor only contained a piece of the whole. We don't know how many more pieces there are out there, whether anyone has duplicates, but we're pretty sure we have partial schematics for a working time machine, one that we are destined to construct. I've never been brave enough to look at the photos and documents of my future, but others have taken the plunge they claim. But every time they look at one of their future pictures, the photo has changed, and sometimes the number of photos changes altogether. As a final warning, destroy the hard drive when you are finished. It is unlike anything any of us have ever seen before, and it seems to be able to turn itself on without a power source. I didn't wait around to see if mine made any noises, but reports from the others say that at night it seems to whisper to them. The third story, Tonka. Ever since I can remember, I have always loved to hike. I grew up near the Mark Twain National Forest and fell in love with the dense woodlands, countless swift rivers, and rolling hills you could walk for miles without any signs of civilization. There is something special to me about discovering new places and exploring nature at your own pace. Eventually, I had to move away from the country to go to college. I was disappointed with the established hiking trails near my university city, not because of the scenery, but because of the people. The city environment spoiled what made me passionate about my hobby. The once pristine trails from my memory were now littered with trash. People made too much noise and scared away the wildlife. These were not true hiking trails, but more exhibits of nature that were spoiled by convenience. I remember the first night I had the idea to go hiking after dark. At night, everyone left the parks and nature trails, and the night was much cooler than the 100-degree daytime summer heat. All it took was one trip, and I was hooked. Usually, I would go to the trail in the daytime and take a moment to scope out the park. My primary concern was avoiding the attention of the forestry wardens, although there would probably be no serious consequences if I were caught. It added a small element of danger which made it more exciting. Up until this point, I had been night hiking 15 or 20 times, but what happened during this trip changed everything. I have not been able to bring myself to go back since. I had been to Tonka State Park a couple of times before, but had never had a chance to see it at night. The park is beautiful, as I am sure anyone that has been would say. The main feature of the park is the ruins of an old turn-of-the-century castle constructed on a huge bluff overlooking the Lake of the Ozarks. The scenery consists of glades, meadows, natural bridges, sinkholes and caves. And caves Tonka is said to be named by the Native Americans. Tonka is translated as laughing waters in reference to the gushing springs in the area. The park was well maintained and was crisscrossed with many trails, boardwalks, bridges, and outlooks. Here is some information on the park and some pictures. The park is closed at sunset, so I had scoped out an area mainly being concerned with a place to park that would not draw attention and find an efficient way into the park after dark. I found the perfect spot about a quarter of a mile past an old nearby post office, since I was not familiar with the area and had to walk through the forest. I had marked the trailhead on my GPS and grabbed a trail map during the daytime so I could easily locate it at night. I got out of my car and got my gear ready for the trip. I set my location on my GPS so that I would be able to locate my car at night without any problems. It was a little after midnight when I set out to find the trailhead. The night started off beautifully. It was a full moon that night and it allowed plenty of light to see where I was stepping. I remember it was warmer than usual that night, but there was almost no wind at all, which was perfect. Less wind meant that I would be able to hear wildlife or forestry wardens before they saw me. After about 30 minutes, I found the trailhead easily enough and got started on my way. I continued to walk through the woodland and came upon a large clearing. Before entering the clearing, I paused for a moment to take a drink of water and allow myself to become acquainted with the sounds of the night. I closed my eyes into the crickets and tree frogs which echoed through the forest. After placing my water bottle back into my pack, I looked across the glade to see if I could spot any people or wildlife and didn't see anything. I paced slowly at first to warm up and to preserve my strength. The scenery went from an open meadow to scattered shrubs and became denser and denser until I was surrounded by dark forest. The moon showed through the trees and provided enough light to see without a flashlight. Stripes of moonlight that filtered through the tree limbs projected onto the path. I noticed a large rock on the side of the trail and took note of it so as to not to trip over it in the dark. As I got closer, it became clear what I was looking at. I retrieved and turned on my flashlight, careful to keep the light low to the ground, and what I saw paralyzed me. It was a dead deer. I've hunted a fair amount in my youth, which included skinning, field dressing, and butchering, so I had seen many in my lifetime. I had never seen anything like this, and would always have a picture of it ingrained in my memory. It was a white-tailed buck, which was common to the area. It was about 200 pounds and had an 8-point track. I have happened upon dead deer while hiking, which didn't make this too rare. If you don't get a good shot at a deer, it will bolt and if injured eventually bleed out and die. But get far enough so that the hunter will not find it. I've also seen deer, which may be a coyote or stray dog may have run down and eaten. As soon as the light shone upon it, I felt it was wrong. The skin was missing. It was not unheard of to find a deer that something had been eating on, but the thing was it didn't have the appearance of it. Its muscles, tendons, and bone were exposed from its hooves to the base of its skull and weren't touched. I then noticed something else. Its head was lopped around backwards. Something had snapped its neck. The eye or where I should have been was facing upward and was gone. I don't know how such a thing would happen, as obviously nothing in nature would do that. Someone would have had to shoot or run down the buck and use enough force to yank the head of a large buck 180 degrees. Why would someone do this if the deer was already down for the count? Then there was its skin. I flicked my flashlight around and didn't see any fur, marks or tracks other than footprints of the daytime hiker. When wild animals eat, they usually rip parts of the fur off, leaving a fairly large amount of fur scattered on the ground. No smell, no signs of rot, no flies or maggots, and most of all this was a public trail, so things like this would be cleared in the daytime. I wondered if it was still warm, but I really didn't like the idea of touching it. This was done very recently. Not wanting to stick around, I put away my flashlight and walked away. I really was not frightened at that point, but I was on edge. My senses were sharper. I stepped more slowly and with caution so I could hear well. In this distance I heard the faint murmuring sound of the waters the park was named after. As I walked, the sound increased. The sound of the quick running water sloshing over rocks sounded like a soft whisper with slight hints of snickering. I could not see the stream, but knew it had to be close. It had been about 30 minutes since I had seen the deer, and I wanted to get my bearings. I opened my pack, took a drink of water. I retrieved the trail map I took from the forestry department during the daytime and compared it with my GPS's location. There were no streams within half a mile. I stopped breathing and listened to nothing. I didn't hear anything. The sound of water was gone for an instant. I did become scared, but calmed myself. I rationalized with myself. It was probably the wind and not a stream. The sound of a steady wind, though the dense forest could easily sound like running water. I was about halfway through the hike and following a trail loop which would bring me back near where I can get back to my car. I picked up the pace. The terrain became more rocky and rugged. The left side of the trail grew into a large cliff facing, and the right side of the trail was a large drop. This is where I first heard it. I stopped for a moment to listen harder, and realized it was coming from behind me. It sounded like a faint step on loose gravel and a dragging sound. Because of the bend in the trail and the cliff facing, I could not see anyone behind me, but knew that whatever it was very near. I remember thinking it was strange that I was able to hear something that faint when I noticed that there were no other sound. I felt my skin prickle and my hair stand on end, and I was rooted into place with an unexplained feeling of fear. Fixed in place, I watched the trail behind me for a few moments and listened closely. Crunch, scrap peep 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 peep. Crunch, scrap peep 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 peep. Scrap peep 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 peep. Crunch. Throwing caution to the wind, I called out, "Hello?" It stopped. Everything was silent. I wanted to run. My body was teetering between fight and flight, but I could not move. My eyes were fixed on the path behind me. I stared long enough that the edges of my vision grayed and tundled. A slight breeze blew softly through the trees, which made a whispering sound. Was that the wind? I looked at the dense foliage around me, and nothing moved, although the sound persisted. Did I get closer to a stream and not notice it? The sound was growing louder now, and it was coming for me. Crunch. My eyes darted back to the path behind me. There was something there. A shadowy form was hunched down over the trail. Its edges were blurred from the shadows of the trees. I would say it moved, but that is because that is the closest thing I can relate it to. It borrowed the neighboring shadows as its form raised up from the trail. I reflected the moonlight in the center of its mass. The slight whispering sound increased sharply to a swell of gibberish, chatter, and a chorus of laughter. That was it. Flee with fleet feet or meet defeat. I ran faster than I had ever had before, adrenaline pumped through my body as I dashed down the trail. I was not able to see the blazes marking the trails, but no, I was both running away from it and toward my car. The trees around me blurred as I sprinted, the world around me becoming a distortion of moonlight and darkness. I ran until I could no longer ignore the sharp pain in my lower stomach and was completely out of breath. I stopped a moment to catch my breath. I tried my best to calm my breathing and listen. I took my GPS out and looked to see how close I was to my car. I had a little less than a mile, but I had to leave the trail to get back to where I parked. I could still hear the murmuring in the night, but it was very slight. That was all I needed. I kept the GPS in hand so I didn't have to stop and take it out, and I quickly jogged to the point I would exit the trail and have to go through the forest to get back. Moving through the forest was both slower and noisier. At about 100 feet from the trail I chanced to look back. The eye was there, and it was looking at me. I could not tell if the trees were moving or if it was only their shadows. Darkness wavered and flowed around it, and it was coming. No longer caring about being heard or seen, I took off. I don't remember how I made it or how long it took. I vaguely remember the pain from running but didn't care. I got to my car and got the fuck out of there. I have never told anyone about it since.